We're recording. My voice is so scratchy. Hi, everybody. This is Daria Matza with Everybody Podcast. You know, this week is pretty crazy here in the Pacific Northwest, and the fires are raging, and the air is horrible, and you can't go outside, you can't take a deep breath, can't even walk my kids to school. And it's got me thinking a lot about just the privilege of being in my body and able to go outside and take a breath and to walk my kids to school. Thinking about the West Coast, which seems to be on fire, and the South and part of the East that's underwater, and people that are just really in trauma right now and experiencing the world as a really scary place, and how that feels in our bodies during this time. I also have DACA on my mind and the people that are holding the fear of what's to come with that. So let's get started with this week's episode and my conversation with Carmen Cool. I learned about Carmen through, I believe it was an interview she did with Be Nourished. And there's one thing she said in there that really stuck with me, which was that she sees health and body acceptance as a verb and not a noun. And it's not a place that we arrive to, but it's something that we're in relationship to and that ebbs and flows. Carmen is a body-centered psychotherapist. She did go through her own recovery and lost a sister to an eating disorder. So her story is rich and her work is powerful. I started with Carmen by asking her what I ask a lot of my guests, which is how she describes the work she does in the world. Let's get started with this week's show.
The work I do in the world is really kind of helping people move away from diet culture and into embodiment and kind of really come to a place of peace with their relationship with food and their body.
What do you feel like in this is unique about your approach?
You know, that feels like a really big question that I am still in the process of kind of learning how to articulate. You know, because there are a lot of amazing, wonderful therapists and teachers in this space, and I think a lot of us are doing really amazing work, and I certainly kind of stand on the shoulders of all the people who have done this work before me. So I'm not sure that I'm really fully able to articulate what's completely different. I do think what I'm doing is shifting a little bit more right now into the idea of therapists becoming more activists. And so that's been a kind of recent shift in how I'm thinking about my work and the work of other mental health professionals.
Tell me more what that looks like for you.
What it's looking like is, first of all, me being a student, right? So me really being a student of liberation, actually, and doing a lot of reading about liberation psychology and critical psychology. And the activism part really means that I'm not sure that it's always enough to do one-on-one work in my office when people leave my office and walk right back into oppressive systems. So in order for me, kind of as a feminist therapist, to feel really complete, I want to have kind of one foot here, right, doing one-on-one deep healing work with people, but then the other part of me needs to be out in the community and in the culture doing something around the conditions that are bringing people into my office in the first place. So that can look like speaking, that can look like sitting on task forces that are kind of doing policy work that I want to have a voice around. That can look like partnering with teenagers and teaching them how to do policy change. It can look like all different kinds of things. It can just mean working differently in the way that I work so that I'm bringing in kind of that lens. You know, I think when we're doing body image work, it can leave us feeling like we're the ones doing all the work, but we're not the ones who are broken. Actually, it's a whole culture that needs to shift.
It's interesting. I think it's been a theme in the podcast too, that becoming involved in activism is really powerful in healing, especially from eating disorders.
Yeah, you know, I have done some writing and work around that when I was doing prevention work with teenagers, that the act of engaging in activism itself can be healing and preventative. So I think not only am I wanting to be an activist as in my role as therapist, but also helping my clients learn how to find where they might want to engage, or if they might want to engage in activism and advocacy as part of their healing process.
So tell me more about what you're doing with teens. I know it's a lot.
It's on a bit of a pause right now while I really think about what the next iteration of that work is going to be. But it started out as an eating disorder prevention kind of program. But really what it was a leadership development program. So I would kind of partner with teenagers, and together we would kind of look at what were the things going on in their schools and in their communities and in their friend groups that were making it hard for them to really be at peace with their bodies, and then asking them what they think the solutions to those things could be. And so they would do their own deep work around their own embodiment, and then we'd do activism projects, actually, that they created, that they led, that they wanted to see out in the world. And so some of that would mean they would go into health classes and teach. They would teach their peers, they would teach younger students, but then we did a lot of work in the community. And then for a while, maybe 6 years, we would go to Washington, D.C., and there was eating disorder legislation in front of Congress at the time, and they would learn how to lobby and talk to their senators and representatives to try to get more support for this eating disorder legislation. It was really amazing, amazing work. And I loved the way that they really got this experience of having their voice matter and of being really listened to and learning that they could affect change. It was just so exciting for me to watch that process unfold.
Well, can we switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about your personal story, which it seems from what I've read so far really has led you to this work. Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair to say, yeah.
So where do you feel like this really began for you in your personal story?
Hard to pin one moment down, but I think in some ways I could trace it back to the story that I often share when I was 10 years old. And it was after Thanksgiving dinner, and all of the women were in the kitchen after dinner, right? So my mom, my grandmother, my aunts, my cousins, everyone was hanging out in the kitchen. And it was the first year we had the electric carving knife, which for whatever reason I thought was the coolest thing ever. Because it was so easy to plug it in and turn it on, and the blade just so smoothly went through the turkey. And I remember grabbing my belly into my hands and saying, I wish I could slice this off the way we sliced the turkey.
Interesting. And what was the response?
So what the response was that everybody joined in with some version of, yeah, me too.
I'd cut off my thighs. I'd cut off my whatever it may be.
Yep. Everyone joined in instantly. And, now I look back on that moment and I think, wow, there's some things that I took away from that probably. And one was that all women hated their bodies. And there was also, I think, solidified the belief that there was something wrong with my belly because nobody contradicted my statement. And then there was also something around how fast the conversation in the community, if you will, joined around body hatred. Like it was just this instant sharing of language, sharing of experience, and everyone kind of joining in with how much better life could be if they could take off pieces of themselves. And so I think that was significant in terms of now when I look back, really wanting to shift that so we could join around a whole different kind of experience that we're having with our bodies.
Well, and even the fact that you remember it in so much detail at 10 really shows that to be something traumatic.
It is something that stood out in my mind.
It's interesting, too. It makes me think of how important the activism piece is where, I can think of stories in my own life and stories I hear from other people where children say something and we kind of don't step up in that moment and say, no, that's not right. We passively let it go and we encourage it, and that has so much weight.
Yeah, and also that what I was expressing is just so normative. It's just so culturally normative for us to feel like our bellies are too big, and that I don't know that anyone in the moment really understood what I was really starting to express about myself.
Yeah. So where did it go from there?
Yeah, so that's when I was 10. And so it was a long and windy, twisty, turny road from there, I think. But where it led was I had a bigger body as a kid, and so did my sister. And both of us, I think as we started getting into middle school, high school, dieting was the thing that the older women in our lives were doing. And so we were introduced pretty early, or indoctrinated maybe early, into diet culture. And always this belief that if I could lose weight, if I were thinner, everything would be better. And then both my sister and I ended up developing eating disorders. Mine really kind of took off in college, and my sister started much younger. But I kind of slid back and forth between binge eating and bulimia, and then back into binge eating. And then I dropped out of college for a semester to go into inpatient treatment. And then after that, really, when the eating disorder behaviors subsided, my therapist at the time was also a fat activist. And I feel so lucky to have been able to kind of sit at her feet and learn from her. And so I think I was introduced into the idea and concepts that would turn into health at every size. That wasn't something that was started yet at that point in time, but I was introduced to some of the people who are now leaders in the movement. I was very much starting to think about things through a cultural and political lens. And then when I took a women's studies course, when I went back to school, like it all just kind of ignited in me, and I got really angry, and the anger was really activating and propelled me into like, I want to do something. I want to heal more and more deeply, and then I want to do something out in the environment or the culture to heal this thing that keeps wounding and rewounding people.
How close were you and your sister in terms of age?
We were 2.5 years apart. So she was 2.5 years younger than I was.
And did you have any other siblings, or was just the two of you?
Well, I have a half sister, but she wasn't in my life growing up, and so it was really just me and my sister for the most part.
Yeah, I was curious if you were willing to talk about it. I have a sister too. About, did you two bond around this?
No, actually, we never talked about it.
Interesting.
It was a very complicated relationship. So I think she started down the path that led to her eating disorder maybe when she was 12. She was young at the time, and I was in my 20s when mine really kind of ignited. So there was that, and she had been sick for a super long time, and it wasn't something that we bonded over at all. My experience with the eating disorder happened so much after hers in a way that we didn't talk about it. And then also our approaches to and how much we each kind of really wanted to recover were so different. I remember showing up for her in moments when she was really trying to, there were times I would show up and be very supportive, but we had a very messy, complicated relationship for sure.
What was her name?
Kelly.
So we haven't explicitly stated what happened, but would you mind just kind of sharing what happened with her story?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, she died maybe 12 years ago, I believe, from her eating disorder, from anorexia at that point.
So how old was she?
Oh gosh, you're making me do math in my head here.
Well, around.
It's okay. Yeah, she was maybe 38 or 39.
Wow, so she had a really long struggle with anorexia.
She had a very long battle. Yes,
yeah.
She did.
Goodness. Did her death affect your practice and the way you approached all this in any way?
Oh gosh, this is such a hard question to answer. But if I'm going to be honest, I'll say no, it didn't. And I think what feels true is that she had been so sick for so long that her death was inevitable, actually. And I think I had been prepared for it for quite some time. So there was a measure of relief when it actually happened.
Sure.
And so, I think what it really did was kind of shine the light on this intersection around weight stigma and eating disorders. And, because in a way she died from anorexia, but part of me wants to say it was weight stigma that really killed her. And so that piece is what really where I wanted to land much more than, I don't know if that makes sense.
I'm curious of more if you're willing to go there. What do you mean by weight stigma killed her?
Well, I think there are a lot of people who would disagree with me, but I think that if weight stigma wasn't a thing, right, then would both of us actually have started to try so hard to change our bodies in order to find the kind of relief we were looking for?
Sure.
Do you know?
Yeah, sure.
I don't think you can separate out weight stigma from eating disorders and from the complications of recovery. I just don't think you can separate it. And I think there's some people that would and would try to, but I would argue that that's not possible. And I think if she hadn't been teased and made fun of, I don't know, would she have gone on the diets that led to the eating disorder? I think I feel nervous talking about this because I know there are people that view this very, very differently, but
no, I appreciate that viewpoint. Absolutely. I mean, how was your family dynamic in terms of having two girls in the family that were so deeply into an eating disorder? What did that look like in terms of what the family thought of it and how they treated you with it?
Oh gosh, the family dynamic. I kept mine really private, to be honest. So I think Kelly was much more, well, hers was always a lot more severe and a lot more public, if you will. And I kept mine very private. So my family didn't even know I was struggling until I went into treatment. It was, I kept it pretty close. Our manifestations, the eating disorders looked so different for both of us. And I think because hers was always so much more severe that's where most of the attention went, and rightfully so. I mean, she was hovering around life and death for a good part of the time.
I was just thinking about how just the emotion and depth of losing your sister from an eating disorder must carry with you in some way as you progress along. But I didn't know your relationship, so I could be completely making my own assumptions.
Well, I think it's one of those things that feels really hard to talk about. I think what I'll say about it is that there were a lot of other co-occurring kind of mental health issues happening. I don't want this to sound like a cop-out if I just say it was complicated, but it feels complicated in terms of how to describe my relationship to her and my reactions to her and my feelings about her death. I think that's hard to talk about without a whole lot of explanation.
Sure. Since we were talking about recovery a little bit with your personal story, I imagine you often get the story of people saying, I'm here to recover from my eating disorder, but I still want to lose weight. How do you deal with that piece?
In my practice right now, I primarily work with binge eating, or kind of the pattern of restricting and then binging. So I don't work so much with anorexia and bulimia anymore.
How did that happen? Did that just happen naturally?
I think I found that working with binge eating and overeating was where I felt the most passion, where I felt the most alive. Yeah, I feel like it's what I'm the best at, actually. And I think there are an awful lot of people that are struggling and in that pattern that find some relief at knowing that there's somebody that specializes just in that. Like they might not feel as comfortable with a more general eating disorder practitioner.
So how do you, back to the question of how you help them when they come in and say, but they still want to lose weight?
So I don't think you can recover from an eating disorder and be trying to lose weight at the same time. I just don't think you can do the two together. So really kind of shifting focus to healing and recovery and kind of healing our relationship with food, healing our relationship with body, doing the work that recovery requires, and let our bodies just settle where they're going to settle, and really kind of not invest so much energy in what the weight outcome is going to be. But again, that being said, I know that everybody comes in with that hope, so we acknowledge it, that it can be here. They don't have to check any part of themselves at the door when they walk into my office. So it can sit here, but we're not going to focus on it.
Can you talk about a little bit about health at every size and how you're introduced to it and how it influences your practice?
I was introduced to it, like I said, I think from my therapist in the treatment center that I went to back in the 80s. And I think I came into it through the fat activism or size acceptance lens. That was my doorway into health at every size. And then what did you ask? How it influences my practice?
Yeah, I'm also actually curious, how do you define health at every size? If someone say, oh, what's that? What is your kind of go-to?
It's shifting. You're catching me, I think, in the middle of shifting my language and shifting my thoughts around it. Partly because I think we're understanding more of what the limits of the health at every size paradigm are and the ways that it can contribute to things that we never intended. So I think the way that I describe it is it's a way to kind of take back our well-being and health practices from a weight-based model of health. So not using weight as an indicator of health status, but really what are the things that we can do to improve our well-being in the bodies that we have.
Do you mind sharing a little bit about where you're kind of reevaluating and the conversation that's going on in your head about how it's shifting?
I think that, the health at every size model was really developed as a response to the harm that the weight-based interventions were causing, right? So I think over time what has happened is that it is centered so much on health. It can become healthist, if you will, right? So the focus on health can leave some people out people for whom health will never be something that they feel like they could ever attain, whether it's people living with real chronic illness or different kinds of disabilities. Like, this image of health isn't something that they're ever going to be able to see themselves as being able to participate in. So I think that is a problem. The focus on the individual practices of intuitive eating and kind of pleasurable and joyful movement can also leave people out. Attuned intuitive eating is a wonderful healing practice and something that I talk about all the time with my clients and something that I practice. And at the same time, I know that it's not accessible to a lot of people, whether they don't have access to the foods that they would like, whether that's kind of living near food deserts or because of class issues, but it can leave people out. That's been a problem with it. And then I think the focus ended up narrowing too far on individual behaviors and has needed to widen back out to really look at the effects of oppression and discrimination and stigma on people's health status too. And in some ways, I think that matters much more in how healthy somebody can be than what they eat and how they move. So really kind of, making sure that it's a model that is including individual practices if that's what people want to do, and including kind of this collective work also.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I keep thinking about even beyond health with people who don't have access or it's not available for them. I also think about how maybe people just don't want to choose health and why there still shouldn't be the judgment there.
There is a way that it says nobody is obligated to pursue health, right? That everybody gets to determine how and what they want to prioritize. And more the point, we shouldn't be associating somebody's worth with their health status. And I think the other thing in there that I was kind of hearing is that on some level, we don't always get to choose how healthy or not healthy we're going to be. Like, we're going to move in and out of various states of health throughout our life. But some we might have some choice around, and some we don't.
I mean, from a very privileged state, I can notice that I've seen that with having babies, right? Like, the choice of always eating a healthy meal or eating intuitively or having time and space for movement has really shifted. And I'm coming from a very privileged place in even saying that, and I can see and start to notice how on the bigger levels of class and access and all these factors really affect how we approach these things.
Absolutely.
I saw that you said you often use this Hakomi method, and I'm interested in what that is.
Hakomi. Yeah, I love Hakomi. Hakomi is a body-based...
I love the word. It's a really beautiful word.
Yeah, it's actually a Hopi word that means, where are you in relation to these many realms? So kind of how are we in relationship with ourselves, with these different things in our life? So it's a somatic-based, mindfulness-based form of therapy. So Ron Kurtz developed it in the 70s, kind of pulled together some Eastern philosophy, Gestalt. I don't have the other things in front of me.
That's okay. I'll link in the show notes to the site for it too, but...
Link to the Hakomi website.
I will.
I'm suddenly feeling very... I've got menopause brain. But Ron Kurtz kind of just pulled in from many different things and traditions and synthesized them into a method that he called the Hakomi method. Hakomi is a method that really works in mindfulness a lot, works a lot with the idea and principles of nonviolence, mind, body, holism, kind of organicity, that we're all just seeking our health and wisdom, and our job as healthcare professionals is to support that unfolding. And then it uses the body, what I love the most about it actually is the mindfulness aspect and using the body as a source of wisdom.
Do you have a story you'd be willing to share from one of your clients or using this practice that kind of illustrates how it works?
I think not a specific story, but more gets a little bit out of the talking about something and into the embodied experience of something. So, if I'm talking a lot about feeling anxious around something, if I can kind of close my eyes and really tune into my body and find out, like, where is that happening in my body? How am I experiencing the sensations of anxiety? And then I can feel into what else goes along with that. Are there memories? Are there words? Are there core beliefs? Kind of tapping into the wisdom and information that my body holds, not just what I'm thinking about something.
So is that a practice of you as a therapist, just prompting those questions to your client in that way?
Yes and no. So what I'll do is I'll invite somebody into mindfulness. And yeah, I might ask some gentle kind of probing questions as a way to let somebody study what they do in response to the question. And then kind of tracking their own experience and studying their own experience right from the inside, like what happens in me in response to this question or in response to this memory.
Is there something in your practice you've seen have the most impact on people as they're going through a recovery process?
I would really want to think about that question. I think if I was going to paint some broad brushstrokes, it might be really this idea of sovereignty over our own bodies, that our bodies, like how do we more deeply occupy our own bodies and kind of take back our choices and our practices from all of the outside prescriptions about who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to live. I find that there's a thread of rebellion in the work that I do and the people who come in, particularly people with binge eating and with teenagers for that matter. But there's this thread of like, you can't tell me what to do, right? Or you're not the boss. You're not the boss of me. And whether they're saying that to the diet mindset, whether they're saying that to friends and family, whether they're saying that to the culture at large, it's like there's a way that rebellion is energy that I love, actually, and really want to help people harness that actually in the right way rather than having this place where we're stuck between either complying or rebelling, neither one of which is actually totally free, but really kind of, okay, like how do we just kind of really deeply center into ourselves so that our choices feel like they're really ours and not in reaction to what else is happening out there.
Yeah, I like that, harnessing the rebellion. And what about the kind of shifting to the diet culture and the culture we live in? What do you feel like are the most poisonous myths out there that we need to start busting and addressing?
There's so many. The idea that we think we can know something about a person based on the size of their body, I think that needs to stop, right? The different meanings that we put onto body sizes, the ways we associate, right, stereotypes and all of that stuff, all of that needs to get dismantled. I think the way we elevate one body type and the way we privilege some bodies over others, that's what I want to say. I think that really needs to stop. And that's true not just about weight and shape, right? That's also true about the way we privilege whiteness and the way we privilege gendered experience, right? Or people who identify cisgendered, rather, is what I wanted to say. All the ways that we kind of say there's this norm that's assumed that people should be living or aspiring to.
I mean, do you have ideas on how we do that?
I think some of it is doing the work at really looking at and owning and understanding what our own biases are, right? Because we all have them. And so really, what are the internal biases that I have and how do they operate and how do they get in the way of me seeing somebody really clearly? What's the work I need to do actually to move away from that, to unlearn those things? I think that's important. This is really anti-oppression work. That's the work we need to be doing across the board.
When you're giving speeches and you're in larger settings, do you have exercises or things you bring to those groups that help shine a light on this and start the conversations?
I think I do that differently all the time, depending on my audience and my mood. But sometimes that might be a visualization that I ask people to do where they might get the opportunity to kind of see what their own automatic assumptions might be. Or I will maybe share some stories. I do a lot of storytelling that can be impactful. I think it's the art of knowing how to ask the right kinds of questions that get people to be reflective rather than questions that they have to answer.
Yeah, that's, in my experience, the best therapists do that. Ask the best questions. This has been wonderful. I really appreciate you giving me the time.
Of course.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
As always, thank you for listening this week. Don't forget to find me on Instagram or Facebook or even shoot me an email. I always love hearing what you have to say about the show or who you want to hear from next. Until next time, take care, everybody.